Yeah, so can we start, or will there be any other introduction? So, hello, everyone. I guess it's time to start another session that we have now.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, yes. It is the third day of the conference of the Young Scholars, Young Summit of Young Scholars, and now we move into the session of non-traditional security. I am Viktoria Ivanchenko. I'm visiting fellow of NIICE, and also I'm analyst of Russian Foreign Trade Academy. Also work with Picredi NGO in Moscow. And today we're going to talk about different issues which usually are perceived as non-traditional security threats. Those are migrant problems, labor force, or refugees, climate change, and so on. And we have, I guess, 6 speakers who already joined us. And as organizers told me, we have like 8 minutes for each speech, probably 8 to 10 minutes maximum. And so then we are expected to have some questions from the audience. If there will be no questions, maybe I will direct the discussion. The first speaker is Anjali Chahal, if I pronounce it right, PhD candidate from Jamia, Millia, Islamia in India. And the report is about right-based approach for migrant workers, contemporary concerns. So please go to your speech, and we will be happy to listen to you.
Thank you, Victoria, for the introduction. A very good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone who is watching this session. I would also like to thank NIICE for giving me a platform to speak. I'm speaking first time on the NIICE platform, so it's a great opportunity. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll just quickly begin with my paper. So I'm going to touch upon various issues which concern the rights of migrant workers and the contemporary concerns in the context of COVID-19. So I'll be touching upon the definition of migrant workers as a category, moving on to the labor laws which are existing nationally and internationally, specifically in the context of India, and then moving on the concept of rights, which is the concept of human rights, the debate between human rights versus the developmental model. And I will also discuss the intersectionality. I will continuously keep on focusing on Indian case of migrant workers, and especially domestic service sector migrant workers in India and the challenges faced by them. So what we see is that there is an intersectionality between gender spaces, livelihood, the different categories of caste and social status. Moving on, I'll also look at the global context, which is the issue of South Asian migrant workers. And lastly, I will focus on the role of state, which is the Indian state, the current regime, and the rehabilitation packages taken forward by them, and also the debate on citizenship as well as the role of city space, the notion of city, who constitutes the city. I will switch off my video because I don't know if I'm clearly audible, and I'll start with my paper.
I hear you very well. I think that everyone
is it fine? Okay, all right.
It's fine.
Thank you. Okay, so rights are associated with being, whereas needs are associated with having. Migration is a complex phenomenon which affects most, if not all, states in the world, and is closely linked to other global issues such as development, health, environment, and trade. Migrant workers as a category include daily wage laborers, construction workers, factory workers, agricultural laborers, urban manufacturers, service providers, domestic workers, etc. There's an urgent need to emphasize on the importance of addressing the root causes of migration at local, national, and international levels. The attack and spread of COVID-19 pandemic virus has brought the issue of migrant workers yet again on the forefront of debates in the public sphere. The topic of migration raises important and challenging normative questions, and especially being a student of political science and specializing in political philosophy, the normative questions becomes very important about the legitimacy of state power, boundaries of political membership, human rights, and justice within and across state boundaries. The question of migrants' rights represents a cutting edge of contention between the consequences of the economic logic of globalization versus the normative framework of the moral values embodied in human rights concepts and law espoused by international organizations like ILO under UN. What is lacking is the absence of a national international political framework that could make sure labor mobility takes place in a way that is both economically beneficial and also respectful of states' commitments to human rights and moral values. The very workers who build these big cities are now facing precarious situations due to the unplanned government policies. The outbreak of COVID has hit migrant workers the most, and they're left without even basic provisions to survive the long road ahead. The informality is not limited only to their urban workplaces. Back in their rural homes, to where they went in waves of quote-unquote reverse migration, they're still considered informal laborers and farmers. There's been lack of political support, which is most devastating for migrants' rights at international national levels, as witnessed in the policy implementations and non-ratifications of most countries with the ILO conventions. A rights-based approach, which I'm trying to focus in this paper, should actually encompass the full range of indivisible, interdependent, and interrelated rights, which includes the civil, cultural, economic, political, as well as social rights. But there are various structural limitations to this rights-based approach, which is the human rights approach for migrant workers. The recognition of vulnerability of the workers is the first step that needs to be taken by the governments. This paper will focus on the social, political, and most importantly, economic concerns for migrant workers, especially during the pandemic outbreak and after looking at the consequences and facing the consequences and challenges, the horrifying consequences on the lives of workers in the context of India. The abrupt lockdown imposed by the central government or the current regime without ensuring any infrastructure providing basic amenities to the workers and their families has proved to be counterproductive. The ignorance and apathy on the part of the governments had brought the issues by migrant workers, the livelihood concerns, dependency on the daily wage, non-implementation of the policies in the forefront. This paper will also focus on the rights of domestic workers, specifically in the service sector, because domestic migrant work remains a largely invisibilized sector and frequently unrecognized form of employment in major parts of the world. Politically, the cities have been built on the hard labor and exploitation of migrant workers, but they never entered the consciousness of the architects. Instead, they're considered part of the problem in cities. The political class ignores them because they don't count as votes, especially in the case of interstate migrants within India. Due to their mobile nature, they don't find any place in the manifestos of trade unions, even though some NGOs and exceptional unions exist, but not to an extent which would manifest their demands and make the government accountable. They spend their whole day on work sites and silently sneak into perilous shelters at night without the cities even noticing them. Another thing that we, in the global context that we need to discuss when we talk about migrants is that the neighboring countries of India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka have implemented disaster risk management policies independently. However, the above incidences highlight the vulnerabilities of migrant laborers, particularly internally and across the border in South Asia. Remittances serve as lifelines between the migrant workers and their families back home, especially during a crisis. These money transfers that the workers send back home provide efficient and effective safety nets to people living in the margin of economies. Unfortunately, as a result of disruptions caused by the pandemic, the World Bank predicts that remittance flows will face the sharpest decline in history in the times to come. Remittances are also a key mechanism for boosting consumption in a migrant workers' home country, and it is the only way where migrants can actually improve and their families can improve their standard of living. Now, moving on to the role of the state in specific case of India, what we are actually seeing in past few months is that, and we can here derive Foucault's concepts of governmentality and biopolitics here, because it provides us one of the ways to understand the technologies and mechanisms employed by the government to contain the epidemics. Governmentality, as a term for Foucault, is the conduct of conduct, where the state uses the apparatus, technologies, and rationalities that shape human conduct through calculated moves. Now, Foucault also, through his work, eloquently describes the governmentality of various epidemics in the history, from leprosy to plague to smallpox in different historical moments. The current regime at the center is already moving to the state of exception, as Agamben would say, prior to COVID-19, with protests on citizenship issues sweeping across the country led by student activists and minorities. They were labeled as anti-nationals and put behind bars because they were supposedly against the progressive march of the nation to a 5 trillion superpower, which thereby calls for the suppression of the deviance in the larger interest of the nation. The mobility restriction in the initial days of lockdown only helped in spreading the pandemic to the rural hinterland once the migrants started moving back to their villages subsequently. The diseases imported by the elites is fast spreading to the areas where the poor live in congested habitats, while the rich and middle class have the luxury to maintain social distance and hygiene or escape from the cities to their holiday homes. While the current regime in India has taken recourse to the Disaster Management Act and the Epidemic Diseases Act to issue instructions to states, it has ignored the Interstate Migrant Workmen, which is the Regulation of Employment and Conditions of Service Act 1979, which is an extremely relevant legislation today. This act, though weak and inadequate, it covers only that, also because it covers only that section of migrant workers who are recruited by contractors for interstate work, and not those who on their own, which is like what called voluntary migration. Nevertheless, sets out certain rights for migrant workers. It guarantees registration.
Anjali, sorry, I will ask you to come to conclusion.
All right. Okay. Moving on towards the Okay, I would like to conclude by saying that migrants should not be understood as an input or just labor. They should be understood as human beings and citizens of this country. What is an urgent task in front of us is emerging out of the experience of lockdown is to ensure registration of this workforce, which is the most immediate step that needs to be taken. Strengthen the law, which some laws which already exist, which governs the employment, and above all, recognize their rights as equal citizens of India. I would like to end on this note. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for this perspective. Now we will move to a little bit another topic. I see, but probably it's private recruitment agencies in Malaysia. The next speaker is Yvonne Khor, a researcher at Monash University in Malaysia. So you're welcome, please, your turn.
Hold on, I try to share my slides. Okay. Can you all see it?
Yes.
Okay. Okay.
You have around 8-10 minutes.
Okay. Just a very brief, because I myself currently right now doing a research on intermediary. So private recruitment agency in Malaysia is one of the stakeholder I will engage very closely before and after, because before I worked as a research officer in the Parliament of Malaysia, and during the amendment of the Private Recruitment Agency Act, I was part of the working group team on that act. So I would like to share my view on this. Okay, this is briefly the slides detail that I'm going to talk about. Okay, as overview, the Private Employment Agency Act 1981, we call it P in Malaysia, Act 246, actually define the private recruitment agency role as a match expert and a filter. In summary, actually is a role that Private Recruitment Agency Act play between the state, which is the micro level, between the non-state actors such as organization like employer and the worker itself. In my case, there will be a Nepali worker specifically. Private recruitment agency have been raised a certain issue like transparency level in Malaysia. This is due to one of the case that is go into the international level, that is Ultra Kinaras in Bahar and the Brestani net that have been operate together with the private recruitment agency in Nepal. So my paper is all based on the research approach, preliminary analysis, the research article by other scholar. At the moment, I'm also doing a qualitative research. and myself, the participation in the parliament briefing and conferences and legislation and policies. So this is I won't go detail on this because the act itself is 1981 until 2016. So if anybody interested, I can share it with you all. But basically, this is the how to say, the history of the Private Recruitment Agency Act in Malaysia that have been go through only for 3 times amendment. Okay, what I want to highlight in my today presentation is the PEAT amendment in 2017 and beyond. Why? Because like I said, this is only a 3rd time amendment on that PEAT Act. First reading was on the 2017, passed on 14 August and enforced on 2018. Even though it was supposed to enforce on 1st February 2018, the Ministry of Human Resource having give a leeway 6-month transition period, which ended in 31st of July 2018. In the Act, overall is improvement, more clear definition, and more strengthened enforcement on private recruitment agency in Malaysia. So one of the highlight I want to bring up is actually on the 3rd amendment itself, the Act itself is already harder, stricter, because it incorporate with the Company Act in Malaysia, Act 777. So there will be 3 type of category license that allow private recruitment agency to operate. For migrant worker, they will fall under the license category C, which supposed to have a payout capital 250,000, a money guarantee 250,000, and for branch 100,000 ringgit. Another highlight of the amendment that I want to bring everybody on the itself is the amendment on the fees itself that can be allowed to collect under the Act. Before, you can see, before the employer, the recruitment fees that allow collect by the private recruitment agency is only borne by the employer. But after the amendment on 2017, this not only borne by employer, but also can be allowed to charge on citizen and non-citizens for job seeker. So in other words, there will be migrant allowed, private recruitment agency in Malaysia allowed to collect fees from the migrant worker. Then after that, Malaysia have signed a labor pact or memorandum of understanding with the Nepal of government. So this is due to the Nepal government have imposed a ban because of the unreasonable charge of recruitment fees by the recruitment agency in Malaysia. So the former Ministry of Human Resource and Kurasegaran have conducted a serious diplomatic negotiation with the government of Nepal. In October 2018, both countries signed an MOU or labor pact and come to enforce on September 2019. And currently, right now, they are on streamlining up the joint working group matter. One of it will be a demand letter from the Malaysian employer to the Nepal part. One of the MOU that I would like to highlight is because the Act itself is already amended in 2017, was supposed to incorporate with the ILO and IOM standard. But in the MOU between Nepal and Malaysia have been adopt the Private Employment Agency Act to be the most term of reference for both countries. So in summarize, we can say actually private recruitment agency role is fall under the Ministry of Human Resource. However, because the application for the work permit is fall under the Ministry of Home Affairs in Malaysia. So there is a various agency and result, there's an overlapping and poor coordination. For another issue will be come up even with be the MOU signed in 2018, there will be still absence of comprehensive policy in the employment, especially on the migrant worker, and very on ad hoc basis for any recruitment process. The private recruitment agency in Malaysia is always hidden behind the employer, especially on their performance. After the 2017 amendment, the third amendment happened, we have 1,400 recruitment agency before the amendment, but after the amendment, we only left half of it. So, but the performance of the private recruitment agency was never like audit or review. So the statistic on the number of private recruitment actually operate in Malaysia was not clear, even since 1981. Then, like I said, they never conducted any audit or regularization on the private recruitment agency about their performance and how they do the recruitment. So after the new provision enforced in 2018, there were 6-month transition period, but within the period, there is no investigation or prosecution against the private recruitment agency that is maybe suspect in trafficking or smuggling. So another point is the bilateral agreement between Nepal and Malaysia actually is very high level policy making. So there will be some comment about that labor union perspective association participation is not there. And with COVID-19, I think the repatriation of a Nepali worker in Malaysia is still a question. And that ends my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Khor, so much. It was also an interesting perspective and gave us a more volumed picture of the world. Now, as I see, we don't have one speaker, so we move into another presentation by Mr. Syed Mubashar Ali Shah Rizvi, who is a student at University of London, UK, United Kingdom. And the presentation is about human security implications of the Sino-American conflict in the Western Pacific. So, please. We already see your presentation.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Hello, everyone. So my research is on the human security implications of the US-China conflict in the Western Pacific. The paper itself is very extensive, but in the interest of time, I will be condensing it as much as possible. So traditionally, a lot of the research on human security is looks backwards. So what I mean is there's a major gap, and most of the researchers look back at human security issues after an event has taken place. So the approach that I am trying to take in my paper is predict the likely implications on human security, and then also predict the possible responses by the major stakeholders, which in this case are the US and China. So I will start by giving a brief background regarding the relevance of the issue. And then I will move on to human security and then the crux of my paper. So let me just start by giving you an overview of the 2006 USS Kitty Hawk incident. So in October of 2006, the USS Kitty Hawk is basically a naval supercarrier, and the ship was leading a supercarrier group in East China Sea, and all of a sudden a Chinese submarine surfaced in the middle of the group. Now the US was enraged at what they saw as a provocation by the Chinese, but from the Chinese perspective, the move was a declaration of their intent to control the waters close to their shore. Now, as China continues to grow, China has had a remarkable rise over the past 3-4 decades, and as it continues to grow and seeks to become a regional hegemon, the US, which at present is the world's sole regional hegemon, is likely to pursue its historical policy of trying to contain China. If we look at the theory of great power politics by John Mearsheimer, the US has done this in the past with Imperial Germany, Nazi Germany, Imperial Japan, and the USSR. So they're likely to pursue the same policy again. And if we look at the events of the past decade, starting with Hillary Clinton's statement regarding the pivot to Asia, and then the subsequent developments, the closeness of relations between the US and India, the civil nuclear deal between US and India, and other events in the region, we can see that the US is monitoring the situation really closely. And actually in 2014, the Foreign Policy magazine, they conducted a research. They gave a survey to almost 2,000 of the most prominent foreign policy scholars in the world. And they asked them what, according to them, would be the major concerns for the US what are the major concerns for the US in the present, and what do they think would be the major concerns in the next 20 years. So if you look at this image, this is what most of them saw. So around 40% of them saw that the US would be interested in East Asia, including China. An equal amount saw the US to be invested in Middle East and North Africa. But the same practitioners, when they were asked for their views about what would happen 20 years from now, almost 67% of them thought that the primary focus of the US would be in East Asia, and including China. So now I will go on to the concept of securitization of the human being. I'll start with what is meant by securitization. So in politics, anytime we use the term security, we mean that a certain issue is above the regular boundaries of political discourse. Securitization is a more extreme form of this scenario. Barry Buzan and his colleagues defined it as whenever a security threat is presented as an existential threat. So that is called that means that we've securitized the issue. In the past, the biggest example of securitization was the Cold War, when both the US and the USSR, they securitized their respective political ideologies, and they saw the other political ideology as an existential threat to itself. Once the Cold War was over, there were many different people who came up with theories. So some like Fukuyama said that there will be no more conflicts. Others like Huntington said that, now we are in the era of the clash of civilizations. But another perspective was given by the UNDP led by Dr. Mehboob al-Haq, who said, now in the future, we need to securitize the human beings. And he introduced the concept of human security. Now, human security is basically associated with the human being. And now, so we put the human being at the center of our security analysis. And some of the factors that we cover in this are economic security, food security, health security, environmental security, personal security, community security, and political security. So this brings us to the crux of my paper. So what are the human security concerns in East Asia? So again, anytime a conflict happens, almost all of the components of human security are impacted. But based on my research, the three most impacted areas will be the economic security. This is because the fisheries in the South China Sea are the source of livelihood for millions of people in the region. Moreover, these fisheries also create employment opportunities for people who are employed in the food processing sectors. Hence, a clash in the South China Sea will greatly endanger the economic security of these individuals. Secondly, food security. Now, fish and marine food make up a significant portion of the diets of the people of East Asia, and any conflict will cause significant threats to the marine catch, and this can result in food shortages for millions of people. And moreover, the interlinked nature of human security issues can also result in food shortages due to economic insecurity. And lastly, political security. Now, research shows that most governments in East Asia are not known for their promotion of democratic values and political freedoms. So, in case of a conflict in the region, the governments of these nations are highly likely to securitize the decision-making process and take away political rights, curb political freedoms under the garb of national security. Now, in the last part of my presentation, I'll be comparing the approaches to human security, an East versus West comparison, and how this will have implications on the approach of both China and the US. So first, the Chinese perspective. In case of China, some domestic aspects of human security, such as poverty, social security, do receive tremendous attention from the government and accommodations. But despite this, the traditional Eastern concept of security views national security as an instrumental part of human security. So they're very intrinsically tied to each other. According to this concept, states are instruments of human security, and hence national security and state sovereignty are vital ingredients that cannot be compromised in any case. Some researchers point this to the fact that in Eastern societies, ideals of collective interests always take precedence over individual rights and interests. Based on all of this, I predict that in case of a conflict, the Chinese are very likely to adopt a state-centric approach to potential human security implications. And as far as any issue is concerned, they will always place Chinese national interest before anything else. Now, the case of the United States or the Western perspective is much more complex because unlike the Eastern perspective, the Western concept of human security is highly idealistic. So what I mean by this is the American people, as well as the allies of the US, would expect the US to act in a very moral manner, act in a way that ensure the individual rights of people in potential conflict zones are not violated. And this is how the US tries to project itself. But if the reality is, and history shows us, especially in the case of the US, that states' practice and ideals do not always align. And this is especially true in the case of the US. So there is the dilemma in the Thucydides' work of the Mytilenean debate, where there's a clash between justice and interest, and the US almost always chooses its national interest. It may project itself to be a spreader of liberal values, but one can see that it almost always acts in a very realist manner. So based on this, I hypothesize that the US might claim to be bothered by human security issues by Chinese citizens and citizens in the region, but it will in the end it will only focus on its national interests. Now, there is another aspect which makes this issue more complex, and that is that the US is allied or trying to be allied with a lot of other countries in the region, Taiwan, Vietnam, etc. Now, so what this does is that the US, although it might want to ignore the human security implications on of the Chinese citizens, it cannot do that with the other countries because it wants them to be part of a balancing coalition to contain China. And again, because human security issues in one country are not independent of the same concerns in the neighboring countries, so this is going to be much more tricky. But when push comes to shove, the US is very, very likely to always focus on its national interests. Just to sum up, I theorize that the Chinese policy will be dictated by the collectivist nature of the Eastern culture, and the American policy will be dictated by their historical trend of placing their national interest above everything else. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your interesting presentation and perspective on Sino-American relations. Our next speaker is from India. It is Rituja Baruah, research scholar at Jawaharlal Nehru University. And the topic of the speech is locating refugees in national security narratives. Please, your turn.
A very good afternoon, good morning, good evening to everybody. I'm Rituja Baruah. I'm a research scholar from JNU, and the paper that I'll be presenting today is titled Locating Refugees in National Security Narratives. So as already suggested from the title, I'll be mainly talking about security narratives and the role of refugees in it. So at the very outset, I would like to begin by pointing out that the modern state attempts to secure its territories not just by military weapons, but also, and importantly so, by building narratives, or what we may call as mental constructs. And this has been referred to as a modern exercise of biopolitical governance by many scholars. And in the context of, building security narratives, refugees have come to play a very integral role, which I will discuss subsequently in the course of discussion of this paper. So the crux of the matter that I'm trying to discuss here is that security no longer simply implies just military security in the traditional sense of the term. And in the present day world, security has acquired a much more complex and nuanced character. And along with the different variants of object of security, the manner of securitizing itself has also changed, and drastically so. So with a primary focus on refugees as the other and how it is formed and reinforced in the process of securing the state, this process of narrative building becomes very important, and it not just shapes the concept of the other, but it also legitimizes the policies dealing with refugees of the state. So it wouldn't be entirely wrong to call call this as a recurrent process that involves segregating and categorizing state through the friend-enemy lens, and which results in the refugee being eternally perceived as the enemy or as the other. Now moving on to a little bit of elaboration on the process of narrative building as a process. So in securitizing the state through the building of narratives and mental constructs, the hegemony of forgetting becomes very important. And the state uses official memory for this purpose. And the use of memory, the official memory, is twofold. First, the state justifies its exercises in enhancing national security by building this selective narratives of history. So in this way, the state in many ways achieves legitimacy and support in the eyes of its general population. And secondly, and more importantly, the state re-employs this selective memory and certain histories to reinforce the enemy image in the eyes of not just its domestic population, but also in the eyes of the entire world. So this is how the refugee population is shown to be the other, or simply deported back to what is considered their supposed country of origin. And one of the most recent examples that I would like to cite here is that of USA. A large volume of empirical evidence have actually been produced by scholars and journalists that suggest the security elites of the US have engaged in employing many dubious analogies, exaggerating threats, as well as the successes of US policies in order to sell and maintain support for their weapon system, military interventions in different countries, and even wars. So, but unfortunately, these evidences have come to the light much later, after the narratives were actually used. And here, I also refer to scholars such as Slaughter and Joseph Nye, that many of us are probably aware of already. And they have acknowledged the value of a well-crafted narrative to assure public and legislative support for policies or practices, or even to entice other states and global actors into alliances and partnership. Nye, in fact, goes on further to argue that the US in contemporary times cannot achieve its desired outcomes without the help of others. And to get the help of others, it must develop smart power strategies that use soft power resources of the information age. The next section of my paper, and I'm making it very brief and precise because of the paucity of time. The next part of the paper discusses the impact of these processes of narrative building on refugees and refugee policies. And here it is seen that states actually indulge in a process of engineered perspectives of refugee, and they are kept at the bay, at the margins of the state borders, and painting them as the enemy gives the states the required legitimacy in the eyes of the population to carry out the exclusionary policies. The refugees then are increasingly seen as outsiders and a group of people that the general population remain unsympathetic towards. So they're left with hardly any recourse other than to continue living their lives in the margins as stateless people. And this exercise of painting refugees as enemy by the state is undoubtedly a political exercise to manage its refugee population in a way that it sees fit. And the probably most prominent contemporary example of this biopolitical logic of anti-immigration policies would be the 2016 US presidential elections, where President Donald Trump, in his campaign trail, assured the American citizens that he would build a 30-feet wall along the US-Mexico border to prevent illegal immigrants from entering the country. And the decision to build this barrier, as Trump said, was, quote unquote, when Mexico sends its people, they are not just sending their best, they are sending people that have lots of problems, and they are bringing these problems with them to the US. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, and mark my words, under my administration, anyone who illegally crosses the border will be detained until they are removed out of our country and back to the country from which they came from. This quotation is especially important in highlighting the point that immigrants are seen as troublesome population to countries of reception. And the only means of solving this problem is to eliminate it altogether. So similarly, within a couple of months after being sworn into office, President Trump also signed an executive order which barred people from entering US if they belong to 7 particular Islamic countries, and those were Syria, Iraq, Iran, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and Yemen. This order was, however, subsequently revoked by the US Supreme Court, but nevertheless, this was an order that was taken out by the Trump administration. And here it becomes very fascinating to point out that the exclusionary narratives of Mexicans and Muslims is built by tapping into these narratives, these popular public remembering. In popular history, on the one hand, we see that most of the drug kingpins and the key figures in drug industry appear to be of Latin origins. And in addition, the US prisons are full with convicted drug lords and street peddlers who are mostly of Mexican origin. And on the other hand, terrorism has been clearly associated with the Islamic countries, and especially after the 9/11. And this political environment that persists in countries like US and other such countries makes it very conducive to build a social narrative that people belonging to particular communities are the root problems in such societies in the countries of the reception. And a particular type of stereotyping happens, which has happened with the Mexican and Muslim population in the US. And Trump, particularly in the US, succeeded in building a national consciousness that depicted men and women of these said communities as enemies, as the other, and a potential threat to their society and not worthy to be members of their society. And this is how probably narratives played out in the perception towards refugees and policies relating to refugees in most countries. So as a conclusionary note, I would like to state that many states across the globe often build narratives that link issues such as rising unemployment, crimes, deterioration of schools, and deficiencies in social services to immigrants. And we always love to have a villain in resolving, in trying to get to the problems that a country is suffering from. And these effects, these narratives actually cause governments to frequently deploy measures to govern the influx of migrants into their countries. And it would not be very difficult to trace biopolitical practices such as these in many countries if one looks at these practices in these countries with a keener eye. Also, another point that I would like to point out here before I end up my speech is that we see that contemporary border surveillance compels desperate refugees to use risky routes such as high seas and deserts, which predispose them to danger and even death. So this is a known fact amongst governments, and yet these measures have surprisingly continued. This indifferent attitude is acceptable to governments. And this biopolitical logic of this acceptability is that the state is making a decision on the value and the non-value of life, distinguishing between those lives that deserve to be lived and those that can be disallowed to the point of death. So as a conclusionary note, I would like to say that we see that refugees are placed in an extremely vulnerable position and in extremely vulnerable categories in the international scenario, where precarity is the only definite and sure component of their status. So such a point, such analysis must be acknowledged and kept in mind while formulating and legitimizing policies that relates to refugees. And security narratives needs a reanalysis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rituja, for sharing with us conclusions of your research. And now we move into the topic of climate. It is a presentation by Dr. Ishan Kumar Paliwal, a PhD candidate, Mohanlal, Sukhadiya University in India. The topic is climate breakdown and prevention of pandemics in the future world. Please, your turn. We can't hear you. Please switch on your mic.
Yeah. Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. Hello.
You can hear now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Hello, namaste to everyone.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah. Let's continue.
Is it visible?
Yes, already visible. Yes.
So my topic was climate breakdown and the prevention of pandemics in the future world. Before starting this presentation, I want to say like climate change and the pandemics are just the two sides of a coin. We can't study them like differently. We have to study them in synchronization with each other. This was a quote said by Ban Ki-moon, the 8th Secretary General of the UN during the 2009 World Climate Conference. He said, "Our foot is stuck on the accelerator and we are heading towards an abyss." This is exactly we are facing this uncertain situation right now. Like the COVID-19 pandemic has hit us very hard. And this is all due to the climate change we are having. Uh, what I want to say is there is a difference between climate change or climate breakdown. We have to understand the dynamics of climate change. Climate breakdown is an extreme situation of climate change. So the factors which led to climate change, or we are uh, noticing them, are like the unrestrained emission of greenhouse gases, the massive alteration in society's relationship to the land. What I meant to say is here, like we have altered the cropping patterns. We have altered the agricultural patterns of our land. We have moved to green revolution in India. Now we are like degrading our land. The unchecked migration leading to resource crisis. There is heavy burden on the countries with the resource potential, and the unchecked migration is leading to resource crisis over there. The economic invisibility of natural stocks due to the dominance of corporate economy. In Southeast Asian countries, we are just converting our mangrove forest for the production of shrimps. We are depleting our mangrove forests, which are the major potential resource to hold the cyclones. So climate change includes both the global warming driven human emissions of greenhouse gases and the large scale shifts in weather patterns. From shifting weather patterns that threaten both food production to rising sea levels that increase the risk of catastrophic flooding, the impacts of climate change are global in scope and are unprecedented in scale. The climate change is an anodyne and demobilizing way to describe such urgent tasks and prospective disasters. That's why climate breakdown reflects the situation we are going to face in near future, along with the emergence of pandemics. Both the issues, as I said earlier, should be studied in synchronization. Now, let's discuss what's the relationship between the climate change and pandemics. Pandemics usually occurs, begins with a virus or other pathogen, jumps from animals to people in what is called a zoonotic spillover. Uh, the 20th and 21st centuries has first witnessed the pandemics, which have the overall worldwide influence. The worldwide pandemic outbreaks of influence occurred in the 20th century were in 1918, 1957, and 1968. Now you can clearly see the difference between the years. In the first and second pandemic outbreak in the 20th century, it was a gap of around 30 years. And the next pandemic occurred in just a span of around 15 years. But in a short span of 20 years, in this 21st century, we have already witnessed 6 pandemics: the SARS in 2002, the avian flu in 2003, swine flu in 2009, MERS, Ebola, and Zika. And now COVID-19 now joins the list. Now, this is the table. This is the data collected by National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration during the time span of 140 years from 1880 to 2019. Now you can clearly see this century has witnessed some of the warmest years in this 140 years. The 2016 ranked among the first during this span of 140 years. 2019 was second. 2015 overall was ranked third in that span of 140 years. 2017 stood at 4, 18. You can clearly see all these years were of the 21st century. Now, what are the root causes of a pandemic? We will discuss that. So, estimated 6,50,000 to 8,40,000 unknown viral species capable of infecting humans lurk in wildlife. The coronavirus that caused severe acute respiratory syndrome, that is SARS, Middle East Respiratory System, MERS, and now COVID-19 pandemics are jumped from bats to human through an intermediary animal host. That is civets in SARS, camel in MERS, and a still unknown intermediary in COVID-19. We have to still figure out what's the intermediary animal in the pandemic of COVID-19. The major factors behind these pandemics are the population growth, urbanization, globalization, and the most importantly, climate change, the relentless destruction of wildlife habitats, and harvesting of wild species have brought this virus in close contact with humans than ever before. The increasing globalized trade and travel can quickly transform these novel outbreaks into epidemics or pandemics. Link between rising pandemics and accelerating global human impacts on Earth, thereby suggesting that pandemics may focus on emerging element of the Anthropocene. Now, the major important thing about this pandemics, like we have to prevent the climate change turning into the climate breakdown, and also the prevention of pandemics. So how can we prevent these pandemics to emerge at a mass level? We have to minimize at them during their origin. We have to minimize the risk of spillovers. We have to protect the natural habitats from relentless human encroachment. We have to create buffer zones around protected areas. We have to monitor or shut down live animal market, just like the ones in Wuhan. We have to create a global early warning system, just like we have for tsunamis and earthquakes. We have to prevent future pandemics by strengthening our public health system. The COVID-19 has exposed our healthcare facilities, not only in developing or least developing countries, but also in the developed nations. Now, finally, the conclusion. In a mere 4 months, the world has been brought to its knees by previously unknown virus. But COVID-19 won't be the last, or perhaps even the deadliest pandemic. The disastrous consequence of climate change and the decades of destructive environmental policies can only be reversed by reshaping society and its relationship with the landscape. Future pandemics can be prevented, but they heavily rely on unprecedented global cooperation. Like the country USA has now decided to withdraw from the Paris climate deal is a serious issue to concern. We have to deal with such issues. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ishan. Yes, really, it's a very popular topic now, and we already marked like 6 months of the official pandemic, which was proclaimed by World Health Organization. Now we are moving to the last speech. Then we will go to the questions. So I urge everyone who is with us listening to the translation on YouTube or Facebook, or who joined us via Zoom, please ask your questions. We will so I will ask them to the speakers. And now we have the presentation on climate change and global energy security, technology and policy options by Nabonita Sen, research assistant at Center for Studies in International Relations and Development in India. Please, Nabonita, your turn.
Firstly, good afternoon, good evening, and good morning to everyone present. Today, my topic is climate change and global energy security, technology and policy options, and we'll be discussing on this. Firstly, let me say that the Earth's population has nearly quadrupled, going from 1.6 billion to 6.1 billion, with an average supply of energy per capita grew at an average rate of from 14 gigajoules in 1900 to roughly 60 gigajoules in 2000. Over this period, energy consumption more than tripled in US, quadrupled in Japan, and increased by a factor of 30 in China. The modern pattern of energy use reflects a fundamental transition from principal source of energy derived directly from sun to those dependent on fossil fuels. Globally, the use of hydrocarbons as a fuel by humans, for example, has increased to 800 folds in the year 1750 to 2000 and 12 folds again in the year 1900 to 2000. The use of electricity has increased significantly in the world, and that rises, and it comes from the very use of the fossil fuel. A study says that the number has jumped to 10%, and in 2000 it has passed to nearly 30%. Humans have become more dependent on information and media technologies such as internet and television. And according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that is IPCC, human sources emitted nearly 49 billion metric tons of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere in 2004. And globally, the greenhouse gas emission has increased to 70% from 1970 to 2004. And if this trend continues, it would increase to nearly 130% by 2040. Now, next is the electricity and its detrimental effects that it has in atmosphere. The electricity industry is one of the most important sector of any country's economy. Expenditure on electricity in the US has reached nearly $355 billion in 2017. And on the other hand, it is a source of various detrimental effects. Firstly, many of the fuels used to generate electricity worldwide degrade the natural environment through processes such as mountaintop removal, resulting toxic sludge to water and air pollution. Secondly, electricity prices are rising and are predicted to rise substantially, which could significantly penalize those regions of the world that is highly independent on inexpensive and carbon-extensive electricity. The environmental effects of electricity generation: every kilowatt hour of electricity generated from conventional fuel produces a multiplicity of environmental damages that may include radioactive waste and abundant uranium mines and mills, acid rains, and it possesses a damage to fisheries, crops, water degradation, etc. Coal, which is one of the most important polluting fuel, coal plants accounts for approximately 39% of all carbon dioxide emission, and it accounts to 1/3 of all the greenhouse gas emission. About 40,000.
Ma'am, you're not proper.
Hello?
Hello, ma'am. Your voice is cracking.
Hello?
There was, I guess, some technical problems, but now we are inaudible. Continue. Yes, please, continue. I guess it seems to be okay, and I would ask everyone to switch off mics. There were some problems, so technical, I guess.
Now comes the waste and water. Am I audible?
Yes, yes. It's
about 40,000 to 45,000 cubic kilometer of water is transported.
Probably you should switch off the video. I guess it would be easier.
About 40,000 to 45,000 cubic kilometers of water are transported each year from the ocean into the atmosphere to replenish freshwater resources. Hydrological cycle that can be utilized for human purposes each year. A worrying proportion of trash never makes it to the landfill or a recycling center. About 46,000 pieces of plastic litter can be found in every square miles of ocean, and a swirling mass of trash, twice the size of the state of Texas, currently circulates in the North Pacific, which is commonly known as Pacific Trash Vortex. Now comes the consequences of climate change. The consequences of climate change are severe and increasingly certain. According to the IPCC, its impacts will include the following. Firstly comes the global warming. Secondly, the rising of sea level, intensification of tropical cyclones, decreasing snow cover and sea ice, more frequent and more extensive extreme weather events, increasing rainfall in high latitudes and decreasing rainfall in the subtropics. Ocean acidification is also causing a decline in the levels of aragonite and calcium carbonate. Rather being limited in scope, the threats for acidification are becoming global nowadays. Now comes the technologies for mitigating the climate change. When evaluating the potential for additional climate change mitigation in the future, three measures are very relevant. First, the technical potential. Second, the economic potential. And third, the achievable potential. The technical potential refers to improvements that could be achieved as a result of the complete penetration of all applications that are technically feasible. Since many of these options include solid oxide fuel cells and carbon dioxide and are not cost effective, realizing the technical potential could be quite costly. Economic potential is defined as the portion of the technical potential that is judged to be cost effective. What is cost effective in one location can also be unaffordable somewhere else. Depending on the prices of labor, material, and especially energy, achievable potential is the amount of economic potential that could be occur with. Now comes the carbon capture. It is the easiest for CO2 to be sequestered from power plants and other industry that have major CO2 emissions. CO2 is routinely captured as a byproduct of ammonia and hydrocarbon production from limestone calcination. There are basic processes of capturing, that is pre-consumption capture, post-consumption capture. The post-consumption capture includes separation process that extracts CO2 from flue gases produced in the conventional air-fired combustion process after combustion of coal and natural gases. Now, secondly comes the pre-consumption capture, which includes processing the fossil fuel to separate CO2 from hydrocarbon. The reduction of other global house gases. Many of the global house gases are causing global warming potential far higher than that of CO2. Their long environmental lifetime results in the essentially irreversible accumulation in the atmosphere. The types of public policies and the ways to evaluate them lies the cost-benefit analysis, the cost-effective analysis. And what is cost-benefit analysis? The cost-benefit analysis compares policies by quantifying their total monetary cost and total monetary benefit, then selecting the policies and projects that have the largest net benefit after discounting for the time. The cost-effective analysis, secondly, is used for policy debates in which it is difficult to place value on the benefit, transit, public education, and drug prevention. It measures the cost of monetary units, effectiveness in units of goods, services, and some other values of outcome. The policy objective with illustrative policy mechanism includes security of energy supply, portfolio standards, targets, and quota obligation, tax incentives, negotiation agreement between producers, government, reduction in environmental reduction in the greenhouse gas emission, environmental protection, energy affordability, and availability. The cost-effective analysis is most feasible when policymakers have decided upon specific objectives or targets. Setting targets is generally viewed as a sign of good governance because it can help communicate public policy, motivate appropriate action, and enable retrospective evaluation. For example, during 2006, President George W. Bush declared that America is addicted to oil and set a goal of replacing more than 75% of US oil imports from Middle East by 2025. In December 2009, China pledged to reduce its carbon dioxide emission per unit of gross domestic product by 40 to 45% from 2005 levels by 2020. Most of these proposals are inspirational and are not binding. In addition to considering the cost-effective of alternative policy mechanism, analysts typically consider other criteria that includes effectiveness, meaning whether an alternative mechanism results in achievement of the policy objective. If the policy mechanism offers only a moderate level of assurance that a goal can be achieved. For instance, it may be necessary to activate geoengineering or adaptation of mitigation goals that are to be made. Policies that can be evaluated by hybrid measures such as equal effectiveness analysis, that is minimizing cost while achieving a fixed level of effectiveness, variable cost effective analysis, that is maximizing the ratio of effectiveness to cost, equal cost analysis, which analyzes the limited by the requirement that cost not exist to a certain level and also by a constraint that alternatives satisfy a predetermined level of effectiveness. Now comes the emission targets. In the Kyoto Protocol, emission reduction goals were set individually by different countries. For example, Australia, for instance, set CO2 emission target of 8% above 1990 levels. Russia's target is to return to 1990 level by 2012, whereas Japan's target is 6% below 1990 level. The US bill debated recently have called for an reduction economy wide global warming population pollution by 80% of 2005 level by 2050. Now, allocating emission allowances. In many trading programs, for example, the EU emission trading scheme and the US cap and trade programs for sulfur oxide or nitrous oxide, which is having a much more detrimental effect to the environment more than any other gases comparing to CO2. Most allowances have been given away to regulate entities. In an upstream greenhouse gas trading program, however, regulated entities that will pass most allowances in a downstream to fuel consumer. This is happening in European power sector as a result of free allocation in the EU emission trading scheme. It has been estimated that UK power sector received a windfall of about $1 billion in 2005 as a result of allowance allocation. Allowances should be allocated in a manner that recognizes and roughly addresses the desperate costs imposed by the program. In addition to regulated entities, other groups that could receive allowance allocation include electricity suppliers, energy-intensive industrial sectors, that is steel, chemicals, etc. Low-income households. Some portion of allowances could also be auctioned to raise revenues for technology research and deployment program. Now, the fact is, what can we use for improving our climate, or for improving the global energy security? Firstly, the things that to be addressed is the how to lower down the emission of greenhouse gases. What are the cost-effective analysis that can be used by any country's economy? That is including the labor, material, etc., and the economy itself. So all this can obviously add to a, if all these are like treated well, a climatic change in a near future for near future or for like the near generation can be always be seen or can always be like analyzed. So by this, I would conclude my topic on climate change and global security, global energy security. Thank you.
Thank you, Nabanita, for your presentation. Now we are moving to the question section. We already have some questions from Krishna Koirala. The first question is about climate change. It sounds like the climate change refers to overall change in world's environment. Please clarify, how does pandemic relate to environment pollution of particular region in relation to breakout of pandemics like HIV in USA and SARS-CoV-19 in China? This question was particular to Ishan Kumar, but if anyone wants to add, please, you're welcome. Mr. Ishan Kumar, do you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Are you ready to answer this question now?
Yes. What I want to say here is like climate change. What you are saying is right. How it going to affect if there is a outbreak, if there is an environment pollution in a particular area, then how it's going to affect the other area. What I want to say is now, if we look at the interconnectivity, the globalized trade, because due to the globalization, we are actually very well interconnected with two other countries. Now, if you are cutting a tree, or if you are degrading the environment in a particular area, it is going to affect indirectly or directly the other area too. That has happened in China. The pandemic has started from China, and due to its very well interconnectivity to other regions, because of the many factors, like the China is very well developed into the business, the trade facilities with Europe and America, the European countries like Italy. So that's why the pandemics first occurred in Italy. Okay, the pandemic was started in China, and then it has started to affect every other country because of the well connectivity. Yes, hello. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you for your answer. We have another question. I guess this question is to Ms. Nabonita Sen. This question about India and Nepal energy relations. Of course, it's not particularly about climate change. Probably someone else wants to add, some from the Indian speakers. In general, India likes to maintain her monopoly over Nepal. How likely will India behave regarding sharing of electrical energy of Nepal to the third country? So this is the question. Sorry, Nabonita, I don't hear you. Switch on your mic.
Your voice is not audible, ma'am. Could you please repeat the question?
Okay, the question is about electrical energy of Nepal. It's not particular about climate change, but anyway. In general, India likes to maintain her monopoly over Nepal. How likely will India behave regarding sharing of electrical energy of Nepal to the third country?
Yeah, obviously, firstly, we need to address some of the climate change that are causing serious threat to atmosphere. Firstly, that includes many things. That includes deforestation or like mining activities or degradation of water levels or water pollution, air pollution, everything. So like in terms of monetary things, India is a developing country. So like in order to have a like a good climate or a climatic change, or like we are gifting a kind of a climate where we can breathe or we can take to our future generations and all. So in terms of monetary things, as India is a developing country, so India has to focus more on the pivotal climate energies that are that are really important to address at present. And in this, like in COVID-19, we have seen that the climate has started to like to regain its originality in some ways. Like pollution has decreased to a level, or like traffics have decreased. So this is what is happening in terms of COVID-19, and this will obviously the first thing that we need to address is how to have a good climate where the future generation can obviously have a better life.
Thank you for your answer. We have two more questions now. The first question is to Ms. Anjali Chahal. The question is, it is said that COVID-19 has imposed reversed migration. How is it going to impact the countries around the world? Please.
Thank you, Viktoria, for the question. Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Yes. Okay, thank you. So the concept of reverse migration, what has happened during the pandemic is within India, the migrant workers have moved back to their homes because they were stranded here in the cities with no sense of livelihood and shelter. And now, since they're finding it very difficult to move back to the city because of less demand, because of the stigma attached to these workers. But when we talk about its impact around the world, because a lot of immigrants, a lot of migrant workers travel across to countries in developed countries, as well as the Gulf countries, more importantly. So it's going to completely affect the dynamics of the politics of South Asia migrant workers. They would be, even though they would be demand in some sectors, but some people might want to hold back, and because of the closure of the borders, it will be very difficult for the workers to travel and go back to the cities. They might not find the same amount of salaries, even in some sectors where they were well paid. So yeah, that is the trend that has been visible so far, that a lot of workers might not want to visit back, and which will actually in a way which will create a lot more crisis in the rural areas, because there are no jobs available back home as well.
Thank you. The next question on YouTube to Ms. Sen. The question is, sorry, I lost it. The question is, what will be the impact of COVID-19 on climate change?
Thank you for the question, Victoria. The impact of COVID-19 on climate, as I already said, that it is having a kind of a positive effect on climate, the air pollution has reduced to much greater level. The traffic has reduced to much more greater level. So this is kind of improving the air quality. Aviation, in terms of aviation sectors, the flights are not flying, the trains are not running, the buses are not running. So all these are causing a kind of a positive impact on climate, as because they are posing a kind of positive change, improving the air quality, improving the water quality, everything. Like this is what is the COVID-19 is causing an impact on climate change. So it is positively causing an impact on climate change, but obviously not on humans, because we are really suffering a very lot in this COVID-19 thing. But in case of climate, it is seriously having a positive effect, as the climate overall is changing in a very positive way. We can see clear atmosphere. It has been seen that the levels of pollution during this COVID period, during this lockdown period, has reduced to a very potential level, which was much needed to improve climate in a better way. Thank you.
Thank you. We don't have questions yet, but for example, we have a comment from Mr. Ishan Kumar Paliwal in our chat. I will say it loudly for our audience who's watching us, that the COVID-19 has shown positive impacts on the environment, but we have to understand that they're short-term in the scale. So we have noticed the overall reduction in greenhouse emissions in the past 140 years. 4.6% of overall emissions have dropped during the pandemic. Yes. So probably if someone has some comments to the reports of each other, we still have not much, but we have some time, as organizers ask.
One thing, Victoria.
Yeah, okay.
Hello. Am I audible?
Yes. Yeah, you're audible.
One thing, Victoria, that ocean acidification has also reduced in this time, in this pandemic time, in the COVID-19 time, which was very much frequent when before COVID-19. But during COVID-19, ocean acidification has reduced, has declined to a very potential level, which is causing a positive impact, which is creating a positive impact for the marine life, or for the coral reefs that were in a verge of getting extinct.
Thank you. As we have some time, and if you don't have any comments, I would also ask everyone from our panel, as some already had those comments, but there were also other topics about refugees and also some other traditional security issues. How exactly COVID-19 impacted the development of your sphere of research? So it's like comment for 2 minutes, please. Everyone is welcome, and I think it would be very interesting to see it from the perspective of this 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, which very crucially changed our lives. So who is ready to comment? Please tell me. So maybe we can go by the list as we presented. For example, Miss Anjali Chahal. Probably you have some comments.
Okay, so there was this paper on refugees. I would like to, it's more of a query question or a slash question or a comment you can take. I understand that a lot of things, because of a lot of illegal immigrants in India especially, the kind of citizenship crisis that they're facing, and it's all over the world, but I'm specifically asking this or making a comment. How can one reimagine the citizenship debate, which is now actually evolving and emerging from a different perspective? How can we have how can we imagine the citizenship to be a broader concept, a broader policy implementation sort of a thing? So if any one of you would like to respond to that.
Does anyone from India want to answer about citizenship issue? Maybe someone have some their own opinion, and don't be afraid to share. So if no one wants to answer, we can wait until someone will be ready to do that. Probably someone else has some comments, questions. Miss Yvonne Khor or Syed, Mubashar, Shah, Rizvi, do you have any comments?
I have a question for Ms. Anjali.
Yes, please.
So I was working in the Middle East for quite some time, and there's a lot of migrant workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, and Sri Lanka who travel from these countries and work as who work in the Middle East. What do you think can be done? Can your rights-based approach be applied to these workers? I know this might seem like a very like a stupid question, but because the kind of governments that exist in the Middle Eastern countries, do you think this approach might ever be possible over there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Mubashar. I agree with you that it's the concern that sort of it's a challenge that I also want to explore and look into. I would say if this is the scenario going on in liberal democratic countries, which are claiming to be liberal democratic, and they've not been able to facilitate measures and the rights approach that I'm talking about, that there is a framework of international framework of human rights, which needs to be ensured for each category of workers, and their specific rights and specific acts. What happens to if the liberal democratic countries, the developed ones, are faltering in implementing them, it becomes a lot more challenging for and right now India is facing that issue, because internally as well as externally for the workers who are working in the Gulf countries. Yeah, I would say that it is possible to an extent to imagine a framework of at least basic human rights, that if there are treaties and if there is an international institutional setup which sort of makes it mandatory for all the countries to ensure at least the basic rights to all the workers, to all the immigrants, to all the immigrants who are working in Gulf countries. I mean, that can be a one step forward, and it should be mandatory for all the countries to follow that procedures, which is very much there in the framework of ILO, but unfortunately a lot of countries do not follow those protocols. So maybe India can also come up with, they should also be much more protective about their workers, which is not the case right now, but I think it should be the case in future, and there should be demands for accountability on those lines. Thank you.
Uh, Thank you for the answer. I will also ask if Ms. Rituja Baruah or Mr. Ishan Kumar or Ms. Bonita Sen have their own comments or questions. You're welcome. If or probably if someone wants to answer or add to some questions which already were pronounced, please tell me about that. If not, we will slowly go to the conclusion, I guess. I think that this session is quite important as during even recent years, the problem of non-traditional security is getting more and more popular, not only in the sphere of science and discussions between experts, but as well this topic is receiving more and more attention from the global community, from some famous, I could say, people, especially celebrities. But at the same time, we see that there is no prominent, no proper, I can say, global governance about those issues. So people discussing that, they pay attention to the problems. Some of the people getting more and more conscious about, for example, climate change, about the way of their living, and about changes which happen to the world and the sphere as well as health security. But at the same time, countries, as I can see, are not really ready to cooperate and to work together on those issues. COVID-19 pandemic is a good example. Of course, there were some attempts to coordinate it even at the level of World Health Organization and United Nations, but at the same time, everyone is working inside their apartments of national states, and to some extent it is successful, but as a result we have a lot of closed borders, we have absolutely unpredicted situation, and nobody knows how the vaccine race will move forward. I would like to thank everyone from our speakers. We had very different topics, different perspectives, and it was interesting. I hope that the audience also is satisfied with this session. If someone wants to make some comments, please, or we will wrap up our session.
Mom, can we take over the session now?
Yeah, I think that we have talked about, we have finished our reports, and as we lost 2 speakers, it didn't take so much time, but I think that nobody wants to take any questions and comments already. So thanks to everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Victoria. Thank you all the speakers. As we come to the end of the session, I would like to welcome each of you as a part of our extended family. You've not just been a chair or speakers, but you are a family that we'd like to never lose upon. As I always say, once associated with NIICE, always associated with NIICE. And talking about this forum in particular, it aims to bring together erudite young scholars from all around the world over a single platform. The aim is basically to create an academic space to encourage young scholars and academicians from the field of international relations, political science, diplomacy, public policy, administrations, and sub-related fields. This conference was being held for 3 days consecutively, this being the 3rd day, this being the 26th session, with 2 sessions running parallelly throughout in the white and green rooms. It has featured around 275 scholars from 25 different countries. They delivered their presentations and shared their understanding on topics with us. And this was one of the best sessions that I've actually attended. Thank you, Victoria, for chairing this session. You actually introduced yourself in the very beginning very well, but on an official note, I would also like to introduce you. So Victoria Ivanchenko is a visiting fellow at NIICE. Her research focus is public diplomacy, technologies, integration process in Europe and Eurasia, Russia, West relations, post-Soviet space, etc. She also has worked at the High School of Economics and as a media relations specialist in society affairs. Victoria holds Masters in European Studies from the Higher School of Economics, Russia, and Bachelor's in International Relations from a university in Ukraine. She regularly contributes to Russian International Affairs Council, Russia, in global affairs, and several think tanks and media. Ma'am, it's really been a pleasure to have you over here. Also, if any of you have clicked any sort of screenshots or pictures, please feel free to share it on your social media handles with the hashtag IYSS2020. Krishna, would you like to add on something?
Yes, I would like to provide some vote of thanks to all the participants
Sure,
of this
please.
session. Distinguished chairs, speakers, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of the 26th session. It is my honor to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of NIICE to all who have graced us with their presence and contributed their parts to make this event a resounding success. First of all, we would like to express our profuse gratitude and sincere thanks to Viktoria Ivanchenko for agreeing to moderate the session today. Our sincere thanks also goes to our speakers for being part of the event and deliver such comprehensive and convincing presentations. We are really pleased to have all the speakers with us here today. We would like to acknowledge our gratitude to our friends from the diplomatic community, experts, academia, media, and different organizations. Finally, I must mention our deep sense of appreciation for our audience who participated in the webinar and those who are watching us live on our YouTube channel. Thank you for your valuable time and attention and for making the session productive with your queries. We are truly privileged to have you all with us today and hope to stay connected with you in the future as well. It has really been a pleasure. Also, do join us at our next session. Thank you very much.